Hello, this is From Ideology to Unity. And today I'm interviewing Talitha, otherwise known as Qumi. She's a channeler, she channels light language, and I really like it, honestly. So, yeah, I thought that it'd be a fascinating interview and a really nice conversation. So, hopefully, that's how you find it. So, hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm happy to be here.
Well, so what led you to what led you to this?
To the work that I'm doing now or this moment.
You know, either or.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I suppose the answer for it would be kind of the same for both. I have always worked with my voice. I've always worked with music, with creativity. I've been writing songs from a young age. And that kind of organically turned into the expression that I kind of work with now. Um, you know, as I just deepened on my, quote unquote spiritual path, as I deepened in my own self-discovery and, healing and integration, the way that I expressed myself creatively altered, shifted into the work that I'm doing now, which is just, it's really still my creativity, but it's through a much more kind of improvisational lens. I mean, this is pretty much what channeling is, right? It's when we're kind of allowing ourselves to improvise with the energy that is being presented to us. I suppose it's a much more intentional lens or perspective of improvisation. Improvising with spirit, co-creating with spirit, um, with our inner kind of creative essence. And so I've always worked with my voice. I've always worked with sound, and in the past 4 years or so, it's become just much more intentional. And I've allowed myself to really use it in a way that is for healing, that is for integration, that is for just deeper attunement to the self, to the soul, to the spirit. And it's kind of just slowly unfolding. It's changing, every few months it's changing in the way that it presents itself. So right now I'm still working with the voice and with, light language, but mostly what I do is support others in opening their voice and connecting and channeling. That's kind of the place of my deepest excitement at the moment. It's not so much sharing what I do, but much more cultivating a space for others to start opening that for themselves, and also working specifically through the lens of the feminine and earth. So working very much in mentorship and co-creation with but it's a very, I mean, it's quite an abstract concept. So I do my best to explain it, and it's changing every day. So I know that in 6 months or a year, it'll be a new expression and a new manifestation of it.
Thank you for that long answer. So, it seems to me that it's very much your approach is very much a divine feminine sort of that there's something more fundamental than the singing and the light language itself. And that's this sort of flow like approach. I can't remember the exact term you used. Could you elaborate on that?
When I was referring to like just improvisation and channeling,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So I would say light language is very interesting because in the spiritual community, we make up a lot of like narratives and constructs about what it is and how it works. And I think that's just our mind really wanting to put it in a box and be able to understand and define it. But light language in its very nature is that which cannot be understood or defined. So in my mind, it's kind of like if we're looking at language as a whole, language as a form of communication and connection between people, light language is like the very abstract kind of feminine side of the coin. So it's language that doesn't fit into a box, that isn't structured, that isn't linear. And so in the same way, in the way that it is presented, it's kind of anchored in this improvisation or this flow, what we call channeling, right, in the spiritual kind of space. But it's really just, it's not presented based on already decided words or terms or definitions. So it can't be pre-constructed. It can't be, in the same way we might prepare sentences in our heads before we speak, right? You can't do that with light language because its very existence and presentation is based on this idea that it arises intuitively in the moment. So it's really very much rooted in the feminine expression of flow, of formlessness, of not having a guideline or a guardrail or a structure or a construct of any sort, which is why it presents itself as like not making any sense to many people, right? Because as long as we're in that kind of linear, logical, rational side of our minds, it's completely, gibberish. But that is actually how the flow state presents to the kind of patriarchal, linear, logical construct that we use in the world. Flow state arises as kind of meaninglessness, right? Flow, formlessness, the feminine as an abstract, formless expression is not really valued, right? So it's very difficult for us to really conceptualize and connect to what it is to be in flow and to honor that when it comes through us.
Yeah, I guess we've become so used to a left brain or analytical, maybe even prideful. There are a lot of wounded masculine, let's say, energies that even in women, especially with feminism, it's become this. I'm not bashing it at all. I'm just saying, like, it's become this trying to be masculine as strength and kind of neglecting that childlike innocence and play that is actually more true to who we are.
Absolutely. And I think referencing children is like so perfect, because children they're the epitome of that, of just pure being in resonance and alignment with what is. They can't be anything else. They're just present, they're in the moment. And it's something that we, from a very early age, we train children out of, which is very unfortunate, which is why people perceive things like light language and these modalities as kind of silly or, overly imaginative or not, particularly useful, because we don't actually value these gifts that we as children bring into the world, the gifts of playfulness and flow and, not needing to make sense or fulfill a purpose.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm like, wait, I'm thinking about what to say. I'm like, wait, that's not the point. Because I'm in an interview about not doing that.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah, it's interesting. Sounds like what it's really about is just it's really involves the inner child. Perhaps it's healing for the inner child, but also maybe healing the inner child allows you to step more into it. So
Yeah. I mean, I found that for me, just using light language, I don't know if you use it, but engaging with it, exploring it, it's really integrated that inner child expression of me. Because very often when we're working with inner child, we very much see it as this separate version of ourselves that we come into alignment with, and we do the inner child work, and then the inner child goes home or whatever, and we go on with our lives as adults. And for me, this work with light language is it's just integrated the inner child to a point where it's not about me having to channel my inner child to get into that place. It's just that aspect of me, that playful child aspect of me, exists integrated within me. So it's not like I have to dip into any place. It's just present, if that makes sense.
yeah, I want to do light language. I do sing in a choir, and I sometimes have been recently this sort of singing tones that aren't really anything particular, like little tunes that are like, and it's nice doing it. And I'm a writer. I write some poetry and I write a bit of creative writing. I've always liked creative writing, but somehow who I became was super identified with my analytical side and the idea of being a rational, logical person. I mean, I'm not neurotypical, so that kind of almost lent me towards identifying with those rational, logical, left brain things. It was almost like why I was different or relating how different I thought I was. And I did keep on being creative, like, but it's like I lost sight of this more intuitive me. And so I've got this issue with like writer's block and stuff where, or trying to write or do a big project and then taking it too seriously. And then it creates this heaviness about it and a seriousness about it, which makes me not want to do it as much. I, yeah, so I guess I'm in a place where I really am focusing on stepping into divine feminine in an internal sense, but also I guess on an external reflection of that as well. And how I thought I was interviewing you, but yeah, so that is related though, I think, because it sounds
Yeah.
like the singing is wonderful and encouraging, helping people do light language is really important. But I think if you haven't got down, if you're trying to do masculine light language, I'm not sure what the result would be. Maybe it's possible, but maybe it is. But that's not certainly not what you're about.
Mm. Yeah, I love what you said before about how you find yourself, um, exploring melodies that are, not anything in particular. And I love just that wording of it, like, because typically when we say something like, oh, it's nothing in particular, we say it in this kind of like, it's like in a disregarding kind of, well, it's nothing in particular. Like, we don't value it. It's just something, And to me, like, light language is like, it's just nothing in particular. You know what I mean? And that's why I think it's so foreign to us still as a collective, that way of being, because in a world where you have to do something particular, like your value is what you can do. You can't just create something, like anything, nothing in particular. You have to create a thing. It has to have structure, it has to have meaning, it has to have purpose, right? I can't just song that I make up off the top of my head for someone. I have to sing a song that has structure, that has words, right? That I know will be valued and received. I certainly can't offer something that people might not understand. So, like, just that aspect of honoring something that comes through you as nothing in particular, that formlessness of something that is it anything at all, is, I think, so beautiful, because I know that space of being in a creative block where all you want is to create something in particular, a thing that can be presented, that has structure, that has form, that others can receive and go, I know what that is. I can define it. I can understand it. And if I can understand it, then I can understand you and I can value you. And we're constantly seeking to find ourselves in a place like that. And what we fear is like that what we're creating is nothing in particular, that what's moving through us is not really anything in particular. And I think the beauty of working with this modality is like, by allowing yourself to just be in nothing in particular and to allow that to just move through you, it, like, for one, it clears like the channel, the creative channel. Like, if the pipes are blocked, so to speak, it clears it. But then it also like anchors in this deeper knowing, in this idea that like maybe what wants to come through you doesn't want to be something in particular. Maybe it doesn't want to fit into the paradigm of this like beautiful, structured, definable, expression that we so value in the patriarchal kind of paradigm. You know what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. It's well, there's this particularity that is a wounded masculine energy. I was going to say something else, but I'm not sure. What I was going to ask you is, you have a spiritual practice generally, and I know people might be interested in light language because this is, I'm interviewing you about light language, but I've got a feeling that not everyone, light language might not be everyone's form of expression. That is nothing in particular, and yet is special because it's that and is their gift and comes through that way. However, what's your spiritual practice, though nothing in particular, that facilitates that flowering or that coming through and that takes down the blocks? Because I feel like that's important, because that's like the earth from which it springs, right?
Yeah, I would say that any time that we're engaging with a creative practice, whether it's visual art or dance movement or music or writing, there's actually an opportunity of kind of like a play space for it, of engaging with it, essentially like a child would. And I think it's really conducive to when you do want to create something particular and you do want to, present a kind of whole piece of work. So essentially, for me, because I engage with music, for me, creating that space within myself is like not always sitting down to make music with the intention of making something, right? With the intention of creating a song, putting something together that can be presented, but spending time in music, in voice, in sound that is kind of almost like what we might describe as like mindless or like pointless, like the way children do. Children will sit down in front of an instrument and they'll play the instrument or make noise from the instrument, and then they'll just make sounds, right? They don't sit down and go, okay, well, I better like come up with something that's really going to sound good and impressive. They just come into resonance with whatever they're playing with. So if they're sitting at a piano, they'll just hit the keys at the piano and they'll just allow sound to move through them. And through that, what we might perceive from the outside is that, well, they're doing something that doesn't make sense. But we don't know that that's what they're experiencing. They're experiencing these beautiful vibrations that arise from these piano keys. They're hearing their own voice in resonance with it. So I spend a lot of time just doing sound intuitively. So just sitting with an instrument and just allowing sound to come through very playfully. So like nothing serious, allowing it to even be like silly or funny or like pointless. Or if it's like visual art, instead of having to sit down and make some beautiful piece of art every time I sit down, like just like moving colors on a page, or like writing, like intuitive kind of automatic writing where you just write whatever words come to you and they're not supposed to make sense, right? It's like really beginning to cultivate a relationship with that side of your being that we almost never get the opportunity to because everyone tells us it's not valuable. And the truth is that it is valuable. And even what we perceive as not anything in particular is something particular. It's just that our minds aren't able to capture it. So like what comes through in a light language transmission, for the mind, it might be like, well, this is nothing in particular. This doesn't make sense. For a deeper center of perception within the being, within the body, within the heart, there is something particular. There's something very particular that's coming through. We just don't have the words for it, and we're not able to capture and hold on to it.
And that capturing is control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not used to not doing that. I'm going to share from myself. What I experience is sometimes I feel this calling, or like recently I felt this calling to do last week or something, to do like some painting or some drawing. And I did a little bit and then I stopped, but there's this kind of thought that I should do that, almost associating the guides or the spiritual or intuitive sort of suggestion, like it's a should, like it's a bad thing if I don't, like it's wrong if I don't. And then it becomes this thing of like, well, I should, and then I don't want to. or like it's creating this sort of, yeah, it's creating the seriousness out of it, and then it's like, I don't know, somehow instead of, oh, I want to do that, so I'll do it. It's like, I don't know, I spend my time meditating a lot, and not even I reduced the amount of time I spend, let's say, doing leisure that was basically from a place of desire, just to escape myself. I've steadily reduced that. In its place, I just sort of meditate a lot, and I do feel a desire to actually play creatively like a child does. And it's like it's so habitual not to do that. And even when I want to, I just, I don't know, it just doesn't really happen because it's like, well, it hasn't happened because it's a should. And my
Mm.
child doesn't like, I mean, a child doesn't, so to speak, doesn't like a should.
Hmm.
Uh, and so no, it's like a block that I haven't quite got past. Maybe other people can relate to that if they're so used to seriousness.
I relate. I mean, that was a huge intention that I started putting into the way that I approached my creativity, because I experienced that within myself of, we attach to things so easily and we identify with things so easily. And anytime we have something that we're passionate about, I feel like it's so easy for us to take it seriously. So it is understandable, that we take our art so seriously because we care about it. And it's almost paradoxical for us to like love something with all of ourselves and simultaneously like not take it seriously. It almost feels wrong, but yet it's what children do all the time. They care,
Pride,
they don't do anything that they don't love and
pride
want to
gets in
do.
the way. Sorry,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
just realized about myself, like I've started with makeup very, very recently. And I've noticed this prideful perfectionism, right? And I sometimes intuitively, I'm going too far, I'm doing too pedantic, it's taking too long. Well, even that itself is a judgment. But like that I'm having less of a good time because and it's detracting from what should be being creative with yourself and how you express yourself in a visual way, right? And it's an artistic thing, and you're losing sight of it because, like, no, I need to get this right, or that's not quite right. I need to do this. I need to do that. And I just got just. Do you remember ever as a kid? I'm just talking to you as much as anyone else. When you're trying to play, and like your parent or teacher was like, "No, no, don't do that. No, do this. No, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?" And it was just, and it felt really unpleasant and suppressive, and you just weren't enjoying yourself, and you just wanted to play. And it's like you're doing that to yourself because you're used to doing that to yourself now.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, children don't like being interfered with. They don't, because they know what they like, right? They do only what they like, and the second it becomes uninteresting, they stop. Doesn't matter what they've built so far with that thing. If they're building a tower of blocks, it doesn't matter that they didn't finish building the tower. The second it becomes uninteresting for whatever reason, they walk away, and that's so pure because they're only engaging from a place of true alignment, which is true passion, but they don't take that passion seriously, right? So it's like this incredible tightrope walk that they just have embodied intuitively. And then, of course, as you're explaining, like we impose all of these constructs onto them and essentially teach them that they need to be trying to control and monitor their creative energy. And I think this is why like so many of us have and experience creative blocks, is because like life force and creative life force, creative, energy, it's very powerful, but it can be very delicate, and it's so easy to like have it siphoned off or to waste it or to block it ourselves, right? Because it lives in alignment. It's all about being in alignment, right? Like when you're creative, you come into resonance with a frequency, whether that's your own or some frequency you're connecting to, it doesn't really matter. So like the second we stop honoring the fact that resonance and alignment is so important in creativity, we actually start to engage with it from a place that's not actually a part of its true nature, you know? And
Mm.
it's very, very tricky, because that means, like you said before, like it means not doing things from a should place of like, oh, I ought to practice piano because I want to get better. And if I want to get better, I should do it, right? Which is, for the inner child aspect of us, such a burden. Do you know what I mean? But once we remove that should, and we actually give ourselves permission to not engage with the creative pursuits we think we ought to, either that opens another space for something else that we didn't even imagine was there, or we actually find ourselves returning to that creative space. And it's not because we didn't want to engage with it, it's because we were like stifling ourselves in, exploring it.
So don't do. So do you have this playful sort of desire to do something, but you've got a block and they've got the seriousness. So allow yourself to not do it and to forgive yourself, accept that you're not doing it. And that means if I want to just meditate and meditate for hours a day or something, or even if go on TikTok or something, then you can do that. But just eventually you'll find yourself, if you're allowing, you're going to find yourself doing what you really love, because you won't be blocking it by being all uptight with life. Because a life block creates a creative block. It's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's very much the feminine principle, right? The feminine principle. And it's the way that I work. And of course, we're all different in the ways that we're a combination of masculine and feminine energies, and some embody one more than the other, and some, are very kind of embodied in both. For me, the way that I work, the way that I live personally is very deeply embodied in the feminine principle. It doesn't resonate for the same way for everyone. Not everyone is fulfilled by pursuing that kind of path. But for myself, being very much just naturally in alignment with the feminine principle, it's really about allowing, right? Because the feminine is not a principle of agency like the masculine. The feminine does not move into a space as this kind of individual agent and exert its power and action on its environment, right? The feminine is the environment. The feminine is. There's no, it's the primary process of being, right? Instead of the process of doing. And so for me, my relationship to my creativity is very much rooted in that feminine principle. And that means this idea of allowing, right? And so if me being creative is me allowing creativity to move through me, that means when I sit down to be creative, if I'm not in a frequency of allowing, if I'm in a frequency of wanting to control or resist, how am I to connect and allow creativity to flow through me? Like, we need to be in the frequency that we want to align with, right? So for me, anytime I experience resistance or wanting to control or exert kind of my personal will on my creativity, I personally choose to step back, because I know that if I enter the space from that place, I'm not going to align with creativity in the way that I personally connect with it.
I agree. But I just had a thought, which might be that if we observe that desire to control in that situation, but just when we were like, okay, let's take a step back now because that's controlling. We can observe it with kindness instead of like, no, I shouldn't be trying to do that. I like, because that's just like judging judgment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit more about the music, because
Mhm.
the singing, because I'm not sure what to ask now. And what do you feel like sharing about your music?
Hmm. Well, I mean, it's interesting in the sense that I used to have a lot of constructs about myself as a musician, right? Because from age 13, 14, I was writing songs. From age 16, I was playing, in restaurants and cafes and like making money from it. So I had all these years as a teenager, right, where we're still developing our sense of self, where I was like a musician and a songwriter. So I developed a lot of constructs around what music was to me, who I was as a musical person, as a songwriter. And my kind of shift into, where I am now, just, towards consciousness and healing and integration, really had to shake all of those foundations kind of loose. So now I'm kind of in a space where I don't even know if I don't, refer to my music. Like, I'm personally right now somewhere I'm not recording or creating any music in that way. I would like to, but I really find myself in a place where I'm allowing myself to not have the attachments to myself as a musician in the way that I used to. So that means like not necessarily having to like create music all the time, or at least in a way that I can present to others, in the form of recording or albums or whatever, even though it's something I would like at some point. But really just allowing it to not be a thing, if that makes sense. I feel like it's so easy for us and our egos to make everything we do like a thing. Like, my thing is music, my thing is channeling, my thing is, and I can feel how personally when I make something a thing, I immediately get my ego involved in the process. And so for me right now, it's kind of like I can find myself at times being like, man, I haven't recorded music for a while, and people reach out and ask when I'm going to, and I can feel the part of me that almost feels shame in not having proven myself as an artistic musical person by having put out music, and I have an audience for it. So like, why haven't I done it? And just really resting in this idea that like it's something that happens, music for me. It moves through me and I create it, and sometimes I record it and sometimes I share it, but like it doesn't have to be a thing, the thing. And really giving space also for the other forms of creativity that want to arise.
Well, I've got nothing to add to that. But I will say that the two images behind you seem perfect for the conversation, because it's all about flow and this ocean of being and sailing on the ocean of being. But when you sail, you don't. There might be some active element, but that active element is actually less powerful in a sense than the flowing forces themselves that you're just sort of negotiating with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's for me, it's all about surrender. Like, how deeply can I surrender to my creativity? And if that means that nothing creative happens, trusting that. Because I also think that periods of like, creative inactivity are like so essential to creative output. I know for myself, I very often go through phases of what my ego wants to call I'm like creatively blocked. But really what I've come to know and understand is like the void space, right? Because the void is the polar opposite to the source, right? So the void being the counterpart to creation, the void of nothingness versus the creative source of everythingness, right? And so what I found is when it comes to creative energy, which is all about the source of creation, of everythingness, it's really supportive for me to allow myself time to be in the void of nothingness. And that's in the nothingness and the void is where creativity is actually born. So I have very often periods of no creative output, of not feeling creative or engaging in creativity. And when I do, I almost find myself like nothing really can happen. And I really come to a place where I trust and honor those spaces, because I actually come to realize that that's me almost needing to recalibrate creatively and rest or regenerate, however you want to refer to it, and really honoring that perceived inactivity of creative energy.
Huh. So, like, I mean, with my podcast, I was many months I wasn't doing anything on it, and I really focused on working on myself, working, going inwards, meditating more, letting go of things. I've I mean, the David Hawkins book about letting go and that sort of thing, that's been really helpful for me. Um, I remember once this relates to what you're saying. It was this summer 2022, and I was laying online in the sun lounger in the garden, just relaxing instead of doing anything in particular. And after that, I came in and I just had this inspiration, and I did some great creative work, or it came through me anyway. And I was like, huh. So rest is the basis of creation, right? You need rest in the first place. And that in a way, that void is the gestation. It is the source, really. And what we consider to be sort of, this is more metaphysical phrasing, claptrap, really. But like what we consider to be the source in terms of the light that emanates from it is kind of like, that's just when we see it, but it starts before that. When we just rest, and in a way that rest is before or in between lives. We've got this rest period, and then we live a life. So like everything is this rest, this burst of energy, this rest and this burst of energy, like the tide.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, when I'm writing my book or writing this or doing that, or writing songs or writing poetry, and I've been meditating loads, recent months, especially in a very recent period where I guess I'm going through lots of upgrades. It's tumultuous because there's lots of difficult things coming up, and I almost felt like I was doing something wrong. Like I should have been creating more, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. I mean, I wasn't being wrong. Of course, there's just not enoughness to that. This premise that you got to prove that you're enough, of being a good boy or good girl in your parents' eyes, or at least you're conditioned in a parent's eyes, which is something like that anyway. So like, relaxing and playing and being a child again, but with all the experience and wisdom under a belt from my life. I'm going somewhere with this, but I'll let you speak. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very easy. We kind of assume it's easy to assume that when we're in a period of, inactivity, rest, meditation, that what's happening is the opposite of creation. And this is again this really kind of patriarchal construct of like only being able to see and value one end of the spectrum, right? So we associate creative energy and creativity with productivity. And productivity and creativity are not the same. Productivity is an expression that happens through creativity. So I can be a creative person and I can end up producing some works of art and sharing them with people, right? But productivity and creativity are not synonymous with one another. So we only acknowledge the part of the creative process that is visible and tangible, which means we don't honor the fact that when we're in silence and meditation, we are engaging in the creative process, right? Because the first stages of the creative process are the void. They are the nothingness. They are the inactivity. That's what lays the foundation for creative output. But what we do is we only choose to acknowledge the creative phases that are visible and that are measurable. So until we sit down and start writing or painting or singing, we're not being creative, right? But the creative process starts well before we start doing anything with it. And I really like to imagine it as like, this is where the masculine and feminine come in as these beautiful.
Keep talking. I'm just going to let my cat in.
Yeah, this is where the masculine and feminine come in as these beautiful counterparts that hold space for and co-create with one another, right? The feminine being like the container of void of nothingness, the womb in which creative energy starts to grow and experience itself and develop. And then as it is time for that to be born, right, it takes form within some kind of tangible expression of doing, right? And that's where the masculine comes in, and you put pen to paper and you put, your fingers on an instrument. And when we acknowledge that creativity in some way is almost always happening, we can acknowledge when it's happening in a non-visible way and actually honor it.
So we're the creator, and we are non-particular. And it's all connected, but more than that, it is all one. So the void stage, it's all one moment anyway. So there's a point in time when you're doing nothing, or you're just being, lying around or meditating or what have you, a point in time when you're writing something or singing or whatever it is, it's all the same happening, flowing. So there's all that same ocean of being behind us. You can point to one particular part of the paint on the canvas, but it's all the same thing. So yeah, well, it's looking at the separateness of us as a separate person who needs to prove ourselves because we're so, because we've got this temporary existence that could just be popped out just any moment. So we've got to make the most of it, and all this prideful striving, I think, perhaps comes from this idea of separation in the first place. That masculine, that wounded masculine sort of control approach comes from that fundamental sense of separation in the first place. And then that's what it's telling, that we keep viewing these things as separate in the first place, the creation, the action, and so forth. What do you think of that? Well, I thought maybe you were going to respond. I'll just maybe nothing needed to be said. Um, ah,
Yeah, for me, my work now with like dismantling patriarchy, and I also want to clarify, when I refer to patriarchy, I don't refer to it in like all the toxic masculine, you know what I mean? Like the masculine principle is so sacred and so important, and such an active co-creator in all that is. But what happens when you value one principle over the other, and then you create a paradigm that's based off of that principle, is it actually begins to distort itself because it's not able to exist in alignment and in balance with its counterpart. So patriarchy within itself, it's just a construct, right, built off of a principle that's been overvalued, right, and that has been unable to balance itself with its counterpart, right? So in no way does patriarchy actually denote this idea that masculinity in its core is problematic, because it isn't. What's problematic is imbalance. What's problematic is valuing one principle over the other, and kind of undermining or disregarding the counterpart that plays a sacred role. And that's what we've done with the feminine, is we've been unable to see what its true power is, because the power of the feminine is invisible, right? So as long as you look through eyes that only value the visible expression of reality, right, what can be seen, what can be measured, right, which is masculine principles, you can't actually see the value of femininity and the power of it. So a big part of me dismantling patriarchy is less about me moving into the world around me and pointing out all the areas that are like problematic, and it's more about just going into myself and just noticing, like, oh, where am I valuing principles of productivity and visibility and these masculine principles while simultaneously not honoring the counterpart of those principles, and how can I bring those into balance instead of, rejecting or getting rid of any of those principles to begin with.
This is interesting for me. It's because my ego is slightly reacting to what you're saying, but I actually understand from a more holistic perspective, more spiritual and non-dual perspective, what you're saying, and actually what you're really saying, I agree with. It's just that the old me, the old personality I had, it felt attacked by identity politics, angry identity politics, accusative, fear-based identity politics. And there's lots of people who, this culture war that happened, I didn't expect to go into this, honestly, but it's a reflection of the imbalance, but it's there because it needs to be healed by the collective. And in a way, conflict is easier. It's not easier to experience, but it's easier to engage in, because you're separate, there's other people, they're threatening you, they have different values and views, and also if you maybe this is all words and intellect, so maybe I'm being masculine in describing it, but there's this idea of what was I saying? I can let it go, I guess. I'm on one hand inclined to say perhaps that focusing on the language of an ideology that is part of the conflict, when you're not part of that, you might say that it might lend to something non-constructive. On the other hand, it might be beneficial because it might be reframing things and framing discussion of patriarchal or patriarchy in a sort of holistic, kind, compassionate way that doesn't judge the masculine as problematic or flawed, but is actually addressing the imbalance.
Yeah, I mean, the word patriarchy is such a charged word. I mean, we need a new one, really, right? Because it's like the second you use that word, there is a different connotation and reference that each individual has, right, to that kind of language.
Yeah. Is that where you want to say that you're wrong for using it because you've had a different life experience, you've had a different perspective, and personally, I look at the imbalance and I see there's a divine masculine has become wounded and it seeks control, and this divine masculine is in women as well, right?
Absolutely.
The aggression of that we often see in the feminist movement is toxic masculinity in the feminists and other movements that claim to be protecting and upholding those who are most vulnerable and marginalized. We unfortunately see the very energy that they're seeking to dismantle. And that could be, you know, I could use this egoically as a weapon. Like, ah, see, you're just like that, da, 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 da. And there's part of my ego that wants to do that
Mm.
because I'm not entirely healed. Um, or there's still some illusion, or what have you. Yeah, I think that's
Mm.
hmm. So perhaps there's something. What does compassionate femininity in all the feminine principle? What's that kind of answer to this whole conflict and the issue of say the so-called culture war, and what's
Mm.
the answer to that, to these divides?
Mm. Well, the interesting thing I really feel is that the response that the divine feminine has to this harmony is the same response that the divine masculine has, right? Because the divine feminine and the divine masculine understand themselves as intricate parts of a whole. They know their principles, they know their energetics, they know that they live in harmony and alignment with one another. The divine feminine doesn't stand up and go, well, we should fix the world like this. And then the divine masculine stands up and goes, no, 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 this is how we should do it. Because they're not in dissonance, they're not in conflict. The conflict is happening on another plane, right? Outside of that divine, pure expression of those principles. And we in our separation actually believe that there is some conflict at the heart of the masculine and the feminine. But the heart of the masculine and the feminine, when in union, there's no conflict because they each have their sacred roles. And the feminine knows she can't exist without the masculine. And the masculine knows he can't exist without the feminine.
We're in conflict with ourselves and we're projecting it,
Yeah,
and that's why we keep.
exactly. So it's for me, it's not important to go out and like, you know, protest the patriarchy around me. For me, when I talk about patriarchy, I'm just talking about the fact that in my own being, I have valued masculine principles so much so that they have distorted themselves because those principles in and of themselves are sacred. We need agency. The principle to be able to create and produce and make things happen, use our will and our force on our environment is absolutely important to our experience on earth. But it's just when we overvalue them that we kind of shield or like block out the feminine, and then the masculine principles get slightly distorted. So when I speak of patriarchy, I never speak about it in like a political connotation. I'm not concerned with like politics, right? Because I know that it's just my inner experience projected into the world around me. So for me, the way that I refer to patriarchy, and maybe I should probably use a different word, but it's just finding the ways that that construct, that imbalance construct, has created imbalance in my body, in my creativity, in the way that I engage with the world around me. And that never means, like, that imbalance is never addressed by shaming or criticizing or judging or rejecting anything, including the masculine, right? Because even the masculine is distorted by the patriarchy. Like, it's not the perpetrator. There's no perpetrator.
It's energy.
It's energy. It's a collective construct that we've built to figure out our own shit, essentially, or to figure out our own stuff, you know?
I don't know if you're aware of how valuable it is that, you know, the understanding, the compassionate divine feminine holding space for the masculine, even when it is imbalanced, you still. I feel like I'm really glad this came up,
Mm.
and I know exactly how the old me would have responded to this sort of topic. I don't know, it's actually like this because it is this wounded sort of sense that of being not understood and being hurt and there's something wrong with you because, because of the masculinity you have or what have you, or just
Mm-hmm.
because of a view you have or whatever. But really, and it's okay that people reject each other in the sense that that's where they're at. The pointing
Yeah.
fingers, it's all where they're at. And it's fantastic though that we're able to have this conversation. But my cat wants to be
Mm.
involved. What you can hear.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's this assumption, and especially within, I think, feminism and the political, socio-political aspect of that, there's this idea that the deeper we value feminism, the more we're supposed to like, you know, be appalled by masculinity, which is kind of interesting, right? But I found personally, like the deeper I have come to rest and embody my femininity, the deeper I value and bow to and respect and honor masculinity. But what I see when I turn to it is no longer the distorted aspects, right? Because if I'm operating from a place that is in deeper resonance and harmony with my femininity, that's the way that I meet the masculine, right? Because it's constant reflection, right? So it makes sense that like if we're operating from a very wounded feminine place, that we're going to see the wounded elements of the masculine principle, right? Because that's the frequency that we're operating in. We are met where we are, right? We can only be met where we are. And I found that the deeper I can really honor my femininity and also acknowledge the ways that history has created this, construct, and still honor like the issues that have been created and the imbalances that have been created. But ultimately, if I can fully rest in my femininity, what that means to me, all I see when I turn to the masculine is that kind of more true divine expression. You know, it's only brought me deeper into harmony with masculine energy and the masculine principle. Like leaning into femininity is never supposed to separate one from the masculine.
That's true. I mean, it's interesting because I'm stepping more into my femininity, as might be apparent, at least on the outside. I don't feel like I'm ejecting or abandoning my masculinity. In fact,
Mm.
the more I step into divine feminine, the stronger in a masculine sense that I am. Because I don't have my hands tied behind my back with all these coping mechanisms and wounded dynamics. The more I'm in balance, the more I just sort of I actively the active element of me just happens in a smooth and more natural way, just as the passive sort of part of me does.
Mm.
So I feel like we're coming to a close here. But is there anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I just feel that, ultimately we are all here to have our own unique perception on everything, right? And so even though we can come together in agreement on certain principles of unity and such, I think ultimately, like, it is for us to deepen into the way we are meant to experience our own perception and experience of ourselves as. And I think masculinity and femininity is a perfect example, because even though we like have both of these energies within us and everything is a co-creation of the masculine and feminine, ultimately, like, we're not all supposed to embody that in the same way, and we're not all supposed to respond to the imbalances around us in the same way. And we're not all supposed to, create the same perceptions and belief systems around us. And that's where it can become difficult, because it's especially right now, because there's so much, I think, just tension collectively around it. But ultimately, it's like having the trust in oneself to rest in one's own sovereign experience of this dynamic, whether that means really engaging with the polarity of it, or if it means transcending that and just understanding that all of that in itself isn't even real, right? It still exists in a third dimensional polarized, you know, reality. So whether it means really leaning into the polarity or leaning away from the polarity into a more unified place, like there's not actually a wrong way of doing it. There's only the way that is in alignment with oneself and all the ways that are in misalignment with oneself, you know? And I think that's really important that like sometimes we hear or read or receive information that feels like it's correct or like a more wise, more spiritual take on the topic. And it just because it resonates with us or because we feel that there's some truth in it doesn't mean we have to like absorb it. You know, it's still for us to lean into our own experience and to trust that, even if in the moment our perception is like incorrect. Because even like allowing ourselves to honor what we feel leads us onwards into a more integrated understanding, you know? I just feel like there's so much pressure in society at this moment to first of all come into agreement, but to also like get it right, to have an opinion and belief system that is somehow morally and ethically right. Like there's some kind of moral standard that we all have to meet, you know? And I really think that that in itself guides us away from our sovereign experience that we came here to have and to discover within ourselves.
Wow. I don't really have anything to add to that. Uh, it's been wonderful talking to you.
Yes, likewise.
I didn't know what to expect really. Um, but yeah. So so if you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our channel. Um, it's Qumi, Qumi, on YouTube, and it's about, well, she mostly sings on it, but she's got some other things, and she's got her own website and everything. I'll give you the links in the description. So, um, have a great day or a great evening, and I encourage you, if you feel comfortable with it, to really step into a play and an unspecific mode of being or an unspecific just moment to moment engagement with life. So yeah, without further ado, have a great day and bye for now.